The day I inherited my family's land, I didn't expect to be told I was trespassing on it. I was still sitting in my truck when the man in the HOA polo shirt stepped forward. Calm voice, polite tone, the kind of authority that doesn't raise itself because it doesn't need to. He said it like he'd said it 100 times before. "Sir, if you don't live in the community, I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." I looked past him, past the gate, past the trimmed hedges and matching mailboxes. I saw streets already waking up, porch lights still glowing, kids' bikes leaning against garages, hundreds of homes quiet and confident, built on land my family had owned long before anyone thought to put a fence around it. I told him my name. Nothing. I told him why I was there. That's when his expression changed. Not anger. Not fear, pity. "I'm sorry," he said, lowering his voice. "That land was developed years ago." That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system, and I had just walked into the middle of it. Growing up, my family never talked about inheritance like money. Land wasn't something you cashed out. It was something that stayed. Something steady. My grandfather bought it after the war, back when nobody wanted hills full of rock and trees. He cleared what he needed, left the rest wild, and used to say land didn't need much from a man, just respect and patience. When my parents died, I was too young to understand probate or filings or what happens when paperwork sits untouched for too long. The land didn't disappear. It drifted, held by the state, managed, protected until I was old enough to claim it. Life moved on without it. I moved away, built a career, paid rent, told the story in past tense like it was finished. Then the letter arrived. Plain envelope, no drama. According to the documents inside, I was the legal heir to over 100 acres. The lawyer on the phone paused before saying something. I didn't understand at the time. There may be occupants. Standing at that gate, listening to a stranger explain rules like they'd always existed, I finally understood what he meant. Occupants wasn't a detail. It was a warning. Because while I'd been living my life, someone else had been living on my family's land, building on it, selling it, claiming it, and I was about to find out just how far they were willing to go to make sure. I never got it back. 2 days after I turned around at that gate, the email arrived. Polite subject line, neutral language, the kind of message that pretends this is all very reasonable, very normal. The Homeowners Association wanted to clarify a few things. They invited me to a meeting. The address stopped me cold. The house sat on the highest point in the entire subdivision. Bigger than the rest, newer, elevated literally and figuratively. From its windows you could see the streets, the playground, even the small lake they'd dug and given a nature-inspired name. That meant nothing. That was her house. The HOA president. She greeted me like a politician greeting a donor. Firm handshake. Perfect smile. Sunglasses lifted just enough to lock eye contact. Control radiated off her without effort. We sat at a long kitchen table. Sunlight flooded the room. From my chair, I could see rooftops stretching in every direction, all of it resting on land my grandfather once walked without fences. She didn't waste time. Out came the binders, color-coded maps, development plans, permits, titles, everything neat, everything official, everything designed to overwhelm without ever raising a voice. According to her paperwork, the land had been transferred decades ago, properly, legally. The subdivision was fully authorized. Then she looked at me and said it. "Your inheritance is symbolic. Not cruel, not harsh, dismissive, like correcting someone who didn't understand how the world worked." She explained that progress had moved on. Families lived here now. Schools, utilities, roads, millions invested. What I had, she said, was a story, a sentimental connection, not a claim. So I asked her one question. "If that's true," I said, "why are you talking to me?" Her smile tightened. That's when she made the offer, a buyout. Generous, she assured me, given the circumstances. Or if I preferred, I could join the association as a non-resident member. Limited rights, no authority, but everyone could move forward peacefully. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I looked around her kitchen. The view, the elevation, the confidence, and I realized something that settled heavy in my chest. She wasn't worried about my paperwork. She was confident the system would protect what she'd already built. Confident courts wouldn't tear up a neighborhood for one heir who showed up late. Confident momentum mattered more than truth. I told her I wasn't interested. The temperature in the room changed.
Her voice cooled.
She warned me gently about legal fees, delays, complications. She spoke like someone who'd seen this play out before and knew exactly how it ended. As I walked out, I took one last look through those windows. From up there, the land looked settled, claimed, finished. But my grandfather used to say land remembers who respected it first. And as I drove away, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a power play. The letters started arriving the week after that meeting. At first, they were polite. Thank you for your cooperation, polite. The kind of language that sounds harmless until you read it twice. One notice explained that my inclusion, status within the community, was under review. It didn't say by whom. It didn't say why. 3 days later, another envelope showed up. This one had numbers. According to the HOA's records, I owed nearly 15 years of back dues. Landscaping, road maintenance, security patrols, amenities I'd never used, never agreed to, never been allowed to access. There was a tidy breakdown, interest already accruing, and a gentle reminder that prompt payment would avoid complications. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I hadn't signed anything. I wasn't a member. I couldn't even get past the gate. The third letter dropped the mask. Violations, non-compliant fencing, unauthorized structures, failure to submit exterior plans for approval, a full page detailing rules I'd somehow broken on land I wasn't allowed to enter. At the bottom, one word changed everything. Enforcement. That's when I stopped calling and started collecting. Every envelope went into a binder. Dates logged. Emails printed. Language highlighted. Because I wasn't being contacted, I was being documented. They weren't trying to convince me. They were building a record that said I'd been warned, notified, and given every opportunity to comply, a paper trail that would look very reasonable to someone skimming a file later. When I went back out to walk the land, I found survey stakes where there had never been stakes before. Bright orange, fresh. I followed them until I reached a crew in safety vests measuring like the ground already belonged to them. I told them they were on private property. They didn't argue. One of them made a call. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled in. I showed my documents, explained everything. The officers listened, nodded, and then said the words that shut every door at once. This is a civil matter. As they turned to leave, I noticed her. The HOA president stood near her SUV, arms crossed, sunglasses on, watching calmly. One officer lifted a hand and waved to her by name. She smiled back. That was the moment it stopped being theoretical. This wasn't paperwork gone wrong. This was coordination. That night, I laid my grandfather's hand-drawn maps next to the HOA's glossy diagrams and saw it clearly. Boundaries didn't match. Not dramatically. Just enough. A curve straightened here. A line pushed there. Ownership shifted by inches that added up to acres. So the next morning, I stopped reacting. I hired a land attorney who specialized in boundary disputes older than buildings. I hired a forensic surveyor who worked with original plats and forgotten markers. Because once boundaries start, moving and police start, waving at the people pushing them, you're no longer dealing with neighbors. It didn't turn ugly all at once. That's what made it effective. The first sign came on a quiet morning when I drove down the dirt access road toward the back of the property. I heard a sharp pop, then another. The truck lurched slightly before settling. When I stepped out, I saw them, roofing nails pressed, just far enough into the tire tracks to do damage without looking intentional. They were clean, new, someone had brought them there. A few days later, trash appeared near the fence line. Broken pallets, drywall scraps, fast food bags. Not enough to call the county. Just enough to make a point. When I cleared it, more showed up the following week. Closer this time. Then my no trespassing sign vanished. When it came back, it was bent in half and tossed into the brush like an afterthought. Each incident lived in that gray space where coincidence and intent overlap. The kind of pressure that exhausts you because it never quite crosses a line you can point to. Then it got personal. My wife noticed a dark sedan idling near the end of our drive when she left for work. The same car showed up twice more that week. Never close enough to confront. Never far enough to ignore. When she pulled out, it rolled forward. When she stopped, it stopped too. A few days later, my son came home from school quieter than usual. At dinner, he asked why someone had said we might have to move. A teacher had heard it from a parent. Someone had been talking. That's when something hardened in my chest. This wasn't about fees or paperwork anymore. This was intimidation. The next day, I installed cameras, motion-activated, cloud-backed, one at the gate, one along the drive, one covering the tree line. No signs, no announcements. It didn't take long. Late one night, alerts lit up my phone. 2 men in HOA-branded jackets moved slowly along the fence with flashlights, stopping, pointing, talking, quietly like they were planning something. They weren't lost. They were inspecting. I called the sheriff the next morning, nails dumping the car. The footage. The response was sympathetic but empty. Hard to prove intent, the deputy said. Sounds civil. That's when the clarity hit. Every step so far had been designed to make me tired, to make me doubt myself, to make me choose the easy exit. But the moment my family became part of the pressure, the equation changed. I walked the land again, slower this time, photographing old stones, trees my grandfather had marked by hand. I wasn't wandering anymore. I was documenting. That night I told my family enough of the truth to prepare them. My wife squeezed my hand and said, "Do what you have to do." The next morning I made 3 calls. One to deepen the forensic survey, one to prepare for litigation, not negotiation, and one to a private investigator who knew how to follow quiet patterns. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, old pieces, the kind that had been sitting quietly in boxes and drawers while newer, louder paperwork tried to bury them. The forensic surveyor was the first to call. He didn't sound excited. He sounded careful, like a man who knew that when something doesn't add up, you don't rush to say it out loud. "I need a few more days," he said. "But there's something here." My attorney was already pulling county records, original plats, development filings, anything that predated the subdivision. What came back wasn't chaos. It was thin, too thin, like someone had removed just enough to let the story move forward without resistance. When the surveyor finally came out to the property, he brought more than equipment. He brought photocopies, old ones, crooked, yellowed, stamped by offices that didn't exist anymore. We walked the land slowly. He stopped at trees my grandfather had blazed by hand, stones set decades earlier, markers that didn't show up on glossy HOA maps but had never moved. He compared measurements. He frowned. He checked dates again. Then he said the words that changed everything. This land was never sold. I asked him to repeat it. He did. What the development company had secured decades ago wasn't ownership. It was a temporary development lease, limited scope, limited time. It had an expiration date. That date had passed. To renew it, they would have needed the consent of the legal heir. Me. They never asked. They never could. My attorney leaned back and exhaled slowly. "That means they don't own it," he said. "They never did." The word he used next was the one that stuck. Squatting. Everything that followed suddenly made sense. The letters. The surveys. The pressure. If they admitted the lease had expired, the entire structure collapsed. Every home, every permit, every loan tied to land they no longer had rights to. So they buried it. The investigator filled in the rest. Development companies that dissolved and reformed just in time to pass liability. Paper moving hands without questions. And right at the center of it again and again was the same name. The HOA president. Years earlier, she hadn't been running the board. She'd been a junior attorney working with the developer. Her name appeared on internal memos. Early filings. Emails that danced carefully around expiration dates. One message made my attorney go silent. "If we proceed as planned," it read, "ownership challenges will be rendered moot by scale." Scale. Enough houses. Enough families. Enough momentum that no one would dare unwind it. I thought back to her house on the hill. The confidence, the certainty. She hadn't inherited power. She'd built it on land she knew wasn't hers. The surveyor packed his papers and looked at me across the hood of his truck. "Land doesn't forget," he said. "People try to make it." As he drove away, I stood there longer than I needed to. Courtrooms don't feel dramatic when you're inside them. They smell like old paper and polished wood. Burnt coffee drifting from somewhere down the hall. Everything about them is quiet, procedural, almost boring. And that's what makes them dangerous. Because when something finally breaks in a courtroom, it doesn't shatter loudly. It cracks under weight. We didn't rush. My attorney filed a clean petition to establish Title and quiet, all competing claims. No speeches. No accusations. Just dates, documents, and gaps that demanded answers. The response came fast. The HOA arrived with a team, 2 lawyers in tailored suits, binders stacked like armor. The president sat behind them, composed, legs crossed, chin high. Navy blue dress, small gold pin on her lapel. From where I sat, she looked like someone who expected to win. The judge entered without ceremony, older, measured, the kind of man who'd seen enough bad arguments to recognize a good one before it finished, clearing its throat. My attorney didn't start with emotion. He started with time. He walked the court through the original development lease, its scope, its limits, its expiration. He showed the absence where a renewal should have been. No signature, no consent, no authority. Then he placed the titled clearance memorandum on the table, not theatrically. Just set it there and let it exist. The HOA's counsel objected. Relevance, interpretation, hearsay. The judge didn't raise his voice. "Let's see it," he said. The document appeared on the screen, dense, confident, full of citations designed to reassure without proving anything. My attorney pointed to the signature block. Her name. The judge read slowly, compared dates, flipped back a page, then another. The room went still. He removed his glasses and looked directly at the HOA's lead attorney. "Counselor," he said evenly, "are you aware that your client's entire subdivision may be trespassing?" The word landed heavy. Trespassing. Not disputed. Not unclear. Trespassing. The attorney tried to pivot. Reliance. Community harm. Economic impact. The judge raised a hand. "Answer the question." The attorney glanced back at the president. She wasn't smiling anymore. "No, Your Honor," he said. "I was not aware." "That," the judge replied, "is a problem." He ruled quickly after that. All HOA enforcement actions were stayed. The association was enjoined from representing itself as lawful authority over the land. And the matter of the title, certification, was referred to regulatory and criminal authorities. When the hearing adjourned, the hallway filled with hurried voices and ringing phones. Reporters appeared like instinct had summoned them. I walked past without stopping. Outside, the sunlight felt sharper. My attorney exhaled. That went better than expected. I nodded, but I didn't celebrate. Because the judge hadn't torn anything down. He'd cracked the foundation. The court had done its part. It had recognized the truth, exposed the HOA's claim, and frozen their authority. But winning in court isn't the same as owning change. Outside the legal realm, momentum doesn't stop because a judge nods. It slows, it hesitates, it waits. And I could feel that pause like a current under my feet. I drove slowly through the neighborhood in the days after the ruling. Windows down, engine humming softly. Kids rode bikes in the streets, oblivious to the power struggles beneath their wheels. Porch lights clicked on as the sun dipped behind the hills, and I noticed neighbors nodding at me as if they recognized authority. Though they had never met me, authority had vanished, and with it, certainty. The families living here had signed papers, trusted banks, inspectors, title companies. They had invested their lives into a story someone else wrote. And suddenly the story had been rewritten. Word spread quickly once filings became public. Some residents approached my gate with folders in hand, mortgage statements, purchase agreements, letters from nervous banks. Their faces told the story: confusion, anxiety, fear, uncertainty. They weren't angry at first. They just hadn't known. They had relied on a system that pretended everything was fine. One couple shared their years of savings poured into a down payment. Another man told me he had moved, his parents here believing the neighborhood was safe. A woman apologized even before finishing her introduction. "I never supported the HOA board," she said softly. "I just felt powerless." Not everyone arrived with humility. Some were defensive, demanding assurances. One man accused me of trying to profit from their misfortune. I listened quietly. Then I asked one simple question. "Did you ever support the letters they sent me? The fines, the threats, the pressure?" Silence, that was the line. That was the divide between complicity and ignorance, between fear and consent. I didn't punish the community. I didn't lump everyone together. I simply observed the truth of their choices and the impact of others. At night I walked the perimeter again, slow, deliberate. Lights twinkled in the distance. Each one marked a family, trying to make sense of a system that had failed them. I thought about my grandfather's words. Land asks only for respect and patience. Nothing more. The court had given me leverage, but leverage is silent, it waits. It isn't about force. It is about options, about shaping what comes next with clarity and responsibility. The easy path, eviction, would have been simple, satisfying, immediate. But it would not have fixed what had been broken. It would have replaced one wrong with another. The truth I now carried demanded more than authority. It demanded patience, careful planning, conversations at kitchen tables, not shouting across gates, accountability without cruelty, structure without arbitrary rule. The moment the HOA's authority froze, the neighborhood looked to me, not because I wanted that attention, but because there was nowhere else to look. Their board had vanished, lawyers stopped returning calls, and the structure that dictated life for years simply evaporated. What replaced it wasn't chaos, it was a vacuum. I didn't step in with speeches or posted declarations. I drafted something clear, concise, impossible to misinterpret. A framework. Every homeowner received the same notice. No threats, no intimidating legal jargon, just facts. The land was mine. The HOA no longer had jurisdiction. Occupancy would now be governed only by lawful agreements. Some residents were relieved, their faces opening with a breath they hadn't known they'd been holding. No more letters, no more fines, no more measuring of fences or hidden inspections. For the first time, they could breathe under clear rules. Pay your lease. Respect your neighbors. Stay. That simple. Others were suspicious. Years under arbitrary authority left scars. Trust doesn't return overnight once it's broken. And then there were those who didn't qualify. Former board members. Those who signed enforcement letters. Those who had weaponized rules. Their applications for continued occupancy were denied. Not out of anger, but record. Trust once broken is not owed again by default. Next came the banks. They wanted meetings, reassurances, proposals. Market stability, exposure, risk. They all spoke in code that ignored the truth. I told them the truth. You relied on a forged title, insured by lawyers who knew it was false. That's not my problem. Their silence spoke volumes. They understood that the old structure could no longer shield them from reality. With lawful leases in place, the neighborhood began to stabilize. Appraisals returned. Property values improved steadily. Mortgages resumed. Buyers stopped asking about risk, started asking about terms. The land was being managed honestly, predictably, legally. Security returned, not enforced, but inherent. The clarity itself became a shield. One neighbor approached me near the old gate one evening. "My place is worth more now than it ever was under the HOA," he said quietly. I nodded. "Value tends to follow clarity," I replied. The old HOA signs came down, replaced with a single simple marker at the entrance: private land. No threats, no logos, just truth. People took pictures, smiled, shook their heads. Life moved on. I still walked the property, stopping at the stones my grandfather set, trees he marked. The neighborhood feels different. Lived in, free, less afraid. I don't pretend everyone sees me as a hero. Some never will. Some lost more than they gained. Justice doesn't mean no one gets hurt. It means the right people stop getting away with it. The old gate, once a symbol of exclusion and authority, now stood open. Families passed through cautiously, glancing at the single sign I'd placed: private land. The neighborhood had begun to breathe for the first time in years, free from arbitrary rules, hidden fines, and silent intimidation. It was quiet, but the kind of quiet that carries weight. A shift in the balance of power that everyone felt without words. Some neighbors approached me with gratitude. Small gestures, simple smiles, acknowledgement of what had been taken from them without fault. Others remained wary, protective, unsure if this new reality would hold. After years of structure built on fear, clarity felt fragile, almost unreal. And that was the point. Stability had to be earned anew, even when truth was on your side. I walked the property every evening observing. Children rode bikes through the streets. Neighbors worked in gardens. Laughter echoed where only silence had existed. Every once in a while, someone approached with a folder. Mortgage statements, emails, purchase agreements. They were seeking clarity, reassurance, transparency. I shared what I could. No lectures, no legal pressure, only honesty. For the first time, people could see the land for what it was. Not a tool of control, but a shared space under lawful agreement. A few residents didn't make it past the review. Former board members, those who had wielded authority to punish and intimidate, found themselves excluded. Their behavior had been documented, their trust broken. There was no debate, no bitterness expressed, simply consequences. Accountability, measured, precise, and final. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about preventing the same manipulation from happening again. The banks followed reluctantly at first. Their meetings were polite, technical, nervous. Risk assessments, exposures, collateral, words that meant very little now that ownership was indisputable. I told them plainly the title was mine. Responsibility for previous oversights lay with those who approved forged assurances. Not me. Silence filled the room and they understood. Stabilized leases and transparency restored confidence. Mortgages resumed, property values gradually improved. The neighborhood's economy, once teetering on the edge of uncertainty, began to recover. For me, it wasn't about money or recognition. It was about stewardship, protecting what had been misused, setting a precedent for truth, and respecting the legacy of land that had been in my family for generations. I watched as neighbors began planting trees, painting porches, building gardens. Life returned, not controlled or dictated, but free and intentional. One evening, a longtime resident approached near the old entrance. "It feels normal now," he said cautiously. I nodded. "Because it is," I replied. "The rules finally reflect reality." With the HOA gone and lawful leases in place, the neighborhood began to breathe again. The tension that had hung over streets, lawns, and porches like a heavy fog slowly lifted. Families who had lived under rules they hadn't written, fines they hadn't agreed to, and threats they hadn't invited began to reclaim their space. Life returned in subtle ways. Children riding bikes without fear, dogs chasing balls along sidewalks, neighbors tending gardens without scrutiny. Each small act was a quiet rebellion against years of unseen control. I walked among them, observing but not interfering. My role had changed. I was no longer the outsider challenging authority. I was a steward, a guide, a witness to recovery. Homeowners brought folders, letters, mortgages, documents that confirmed what they already suspected. They had been misled. I explained patiently and clearly that their leases were now legitimate, transparent and enforceable only through law. No committees, no inspections, no arbitrary punishments, just respect, honesty, and boundaries. Some residents were wary. They had lived under arbitrary rules for years. Freedom felt fragile, almost too good to be true. I offered reassurance in the form of facts. Every lease, every term, every boundary clearly outlined. Mistakes of the past acknowledged, misdeeds addressed. Consequences applied only to those whose actions had been recorded. Former board members who had wielded authority to intimidate were denied renewal. Trust once broken does not reset automatically. There was no malice in this, only precision. The banks returned next. Nervous at first, their meetings focused on exposure, risk, and stability. I spoke plainly. The title is mine. Past failures of verification, insurance, and oversight were not my responsibility. Silence fell in the room. Gradually, confidence returned. Mortgages resumed, appraisal stabilized, and property values began to rise steadily. What had once been an uncertain investment was now grounded in law, transparency, and clarity. I spent time walking the property, tracing the markers set by my grandfather, the stones he placed, the trees he blazed. Every evening I observed neighbors rebuilding trust in their streets. Gardens and homes. They painted porches, planted trees, repaired fences, not as an obligation but as an act of care, ownership, and connection. Life returned to the land, not through control, but through respect. It was slower, quieter, but infinitely more lasting. Some homeowners stopped me to say thanks. One neighbor, who had kept his head down for years, approached near the old gate. "My place is worth more than ever now," he said cautiously. I nodded. "Value follows clarity," I replied. And it did. With clear ownership, defined boundaries, and lawful agreements, confidence in the neighborhood returned, stronger than before. Families could live, build, and plan without fear. Standing there, I could see everything, every street, every roof, every tree that my grandfather had walked past decades before. The neighborhood wasn't mine in the way a trophy belongs to its owner. It wasn't about possession or dominance. It was about stewardship, about making sure the truth had space to exist where lies had once flourished. The old HOA, the letters, the threats, the hidden enforcement, they were gone. What remained was clarity, order without oppression, and families who could live without looking over their shoulders. The weight of responsibility didn't vanish with the court's ruling. If anything, it grew heavier. The land had always been patient, but patience demanded respect, and respect required vigilance. I didn't need patrols or committees, but I did need accountability, records, agreements. Lawful occupancy wasn't just a phrase, it was a framework. A promise that everyone who called this place home could do so without fear or manipulation. Some neighbors approached cautiously. Years of arbitrary authority had taught them to expect conflict. I didn't lecture. I didn't enforce from a throne. I explained leases, answered questions, clarified expectations. Long-term agreements replaced uncertainty. There were no secret rules, no hidden fines, no committees dictating life behind the facade of governance. Families who had once felt powerless could now breathe freely. Trust once broken had been rebuilt deliberately, openly, and with fairness as the cornerstone. The few who had misused authority, former board members who signed enforcement letters, instigated pressure campaigns, or acted in bad faith did not receive automatic privileges. Their behavior had been documented, their access denied.
Justice doesn't need drama.
It doesn't need applause. It only needs to be exact. And the land remembers. I had learned that lesson well. History leaves markers. The stones my grandfather set, the trees he blazed, the old fence lines, they were guides. Constants in a world too often reshaped by ambition or indifference. They reminded me that standing up for truth isn't about confrontation. It's about persistence, patience, and respect. Slowly, life normalized. The children played in the streets. Neighbors waved, families planted gardens, painted homes, built porches, and lived without fear. Mortgages were processed with confidence. Banks, insurers, and appraisers understood the land's lawful status. Even property values stabilized, not from hype or manipulation, but because clarity creates security. What the HOA had spent decades controlling through intimidation was now replaced with a simple framework of fairness. The battle was over, but the stewardship had only begun.